backwards, how has the music industry traditionally dealt with mental health? What has it done? The mental health issues have always been there, so how has it reacted to them?
I would say, well, maybe it was actually disastrous.
Hello and welcome to Music Ally Focus with me, Music Ally's editor Joe Sparrow. And in this week's episode, I hopped on the U8 and travelled across Berlin to go to Neukölln to the office of music industry psychologist and therapist Anne Löhr to get a snapshot of the state of mental health within the music industry, as well as her interpretation of how well the industry has supported the mental health of the people working in it over the years. Spoiler, it's not been great, but it's getting better. All that in just 1 minute. Now, if you're not familiar with Music Ally Focus, we take one meaningful music business story at a time and focus on it. And therefore, this podcast is also going to be quick. It's going to take about the same amount of time as Corey Masellaro of the United States could hypothetically execute 15,000 one-handed claps. Corey did 468 one-handed claps in 1 minute in 2021. And Corey says that he was determined to break this record because he wanted to make the most of what some consider a useless skill. You hang in there, Corey. More the power to you. Now, talking of doing the same thing over and over and over again and getting the same results, the music industry has, according to Anne Löhr, stuck to one approach when dealing with mental health. And the results have been disastrous. So we talked about the state of mental health in the music industry right now, what people are saying to her, and what can be done differently. We talked about how things are changing, who's driving that change, and whether they're changing fast enough, and importantly, whether the big players in the music industry, like major labels, have a duty of care to the people that it is making money from, like the artists or the people working in their teams. It's a fascinating interview. Let's go right over to it now. Well, this is one of those nice podcasts where I get to actually speak to someone in person and not through a computer screen. So we're here in Neukölln in Berlin, and I'm in the office of Anne Löhr. Good to see you. Can you tell us, as a starting point, who you are, what you do, and where your work is involved, please?
Welcome to my practice. This is nice. Usually I'm the one who asks the questions. Now I'm answering. So we're here in Neukölln in Berlin. This is where my practice are. This is where I usually work the most, also work remotely. I'm a psychologist and a trained systemic therapist, and I work in the music business. That means I do one-on-one coaching and psychological counseling and therapy with artists and music industry professionals. I also do band mediation, band supervision, band therapy, and I work with teams and companies in the music business. So this is mostly workshops and trainings. And let's say the headline on all of this is mental health in the music business. So it's about dealing with anxiety, performance anxiety, motivation, burnout, stress, dealing with relationships, dealing with getting famous, dealing with creativity and all these things. Yes, and I'm also part of MITC, Music Industry Therapist Collective, which is a group of therapists, of people who have been working in the music industry and also have an extra education in clinical psychology and therapy. And so we all combine our expertise in these two fields and provide, as I do, also one-on-ones and workshops and stuff like that, but also provide backstage care and tour preparation, and usually work with like a bigger scale of people where you need more than just one person providing mental health care. So we usually working as a team, picking like different expertise is needed, for example, for festival backstage care and stuff like that.
So the MITC, can we just talk a little bit more about that first? Because if I'm understanding it right, it's a combination of, it's a group of you who are pooling resources and expertise to develop your own individual practice, but also to feed into best practices for understanding mental health across the music industry. But you also then go and do hands-on work together in places like that. How does what you're doing with MITC feed into, let's say, the work you do with big companies in the music industry? So if you go and work with, I don't know, a management company or a label and say, hey, we've come to sort out your mental health. How does that work?
Well, depending on the size of the company, let's say, well, because I'm doing that in Germany as well on my own, let's say. And with MITC, what we do is, we're looking at, for example, for a tour preparation, right? You have the crew, you have the tour management, you have the band or the artist, you have the promotion team, you have all these different kind of people that are going to go on this journey together, let's say. So what we do then is we kind of like, of course, talk to them and find out, okay, so what are the problems you have been facing in the past? What are your experiences on mental health, like coping with stress? What are your coping strategies? And what is your aim? Like, what do you need in order to go on this journey, do this tour in a more healthier way? So usually people can address the problems right away. Okay, they would say, I'm having sleeping problems, or the nutrition is not well, or we don't have routines that we established in order to, deal with working at night, or we have problems with communicating because usually it's a very stressful environment being on tour. And then, of course, artists, for example, have different issues concerning, okay, how do I, is there any performance anxiety, or how do I deal with the, extreme arousal on being on stage, and how do I deal with the media and all these things. So as a crew that would go on tour, you could approach us and be like, okay, this is the problems we're facing, and then we would provide with the therapist and specialist in our team in order to prepare, or also like be available on tour and doing the aftermath as well, because you probably all heard of the English word tour hole. In German it's a Tourloch. When it's over, that's also very stressful for the body, right? Because the change is so big. So that could be an example of what we do with MITC.
Tourloch. Every day is a school day when you're learning a new language. You just mentioned there a whole bunch of different mental stresses for various different people operating in the music industry, regardless whether you're a performer or you're working in an office under tight deadlines all the time. It's clear that the music industry is one of high pressure, and that's a source, it goes without saying, of it was going to affect your mental health. What is your, if you like, a snapshot overview of the state of mental health within the music industry? And I mean, not mental health care, but like the mental health of the people working in it. I know that's a very broad question.
It's hard to answer because it depends very much on the person and the work environment. There is, of course, differences if you're an artist, and the stressors are a little different that you face to music industry professional, for example. Okay, but snapshot status quo. Mental health is a big issue. It has been for a long time. It's just, the awareness of the problem is there, I would say, at least in Germany and UK and, the countries of the colleagues I work with. We all suffered in the pandemic, and it kind of showed a lot of not just individual problems, but also structural and work environment related problems that affect the mental health of people. So I think in the pandemic and also after the pandemic, it got really clear, or it got to the surface, let's say, to feel like, okay, there are certain things occupational stressors that we should address in order to work healthy in the work environment of in the music industry. So, there's bands that have to stop touring because of mental health issues. There's a lot of artists that in the creative process suffer from mental health issues. We have an increasing burnout rate, well, not only in the music industry, but there too. So the numbers show that, in 2016, there was this study from Help Musicians UK. I think it's one of the popular ones. And it said that nearly 70% of the people who got asked out of the music business were suffering from anxiety and depression. And that's a very high number. There are some other studies after that, and it showed that the people in the business statistically show higher numbers of mental health issues. And that didn't change yet, I would say. So status quo is, it is a big issue. We raised a lot of awareness, and I would say we're on a good way. Let's speak optimistic, on a good way in also providing help, because it's a different thing on talking about it and knowing about it. I think we have a lot of access to knowledge, I would say. You can Google a lot of things on mental health also in the music business. You will find a lot of ideas and, theory and stuff like that. So I guess now we're at the point where we still have to talk about it, of course, but we have to get into the what do we do now? And this is where the mental health care kicks in. And of course, changing structures, adapting work environment to the possibility of more healthier ways of working, yeah.
You mentioned there about structures and the way that parts of the music industry are dealing with this or not dealing with it. How traditionally has the music industry dealt with the mental health of the people working in it, whether that's performers or anyone under pressure in the music industry, which is lots of people? You mentioned positivity there and that awareness is being raised, but you also mentioned that the statistics show a very high level of stress and anxiety. So we're coming from let's say a bad place. How has the industry, in order to sort of look forward, can we just say, looking backwards, how has the music industry traditionally dealt with mental health? What has it done? The mental health issues have always been there, so how has it reacted to them?
I would say, well, maybe it was actually disastrous. We all know that mental health issues were either ignored or glorified or normalized. We all know the stories of, Amy Winehouse and Kurt Cobain. When you see these biopics, for example, the Elvis movie and stuff, you can see these, or sometimes they show that like this high pressure, and then that the doctors, didn't really help in order to have the person healthy, but to get the person on stage and stuff like that. So we have this sex, drugs, and rock and roll thing. High misuse of drugs, all these things. So it has been there, and I would say that dealing with it, was disastrous, let's say. And that's still an issue sometimes. Well, the normalization we still have, I would say that glorifying, not so much anymore, maybe. But making it an individual problem. Being like, okay, so if you can't deal with the stressors in your career, it's your fault and you're just not made for the business. So in order to, some musicians are very dependent on being in this business and earning money with what they do. So you kind of have to stay in the business. There's a lot of people that do not have a plan B, or that's very problematic to find something equal. Yeah, it was dealt with like, you are responsible for, coping. You're responsible for getting along. If you don't, you're out. And there's, I think, a shift also, maybe also coming with the pandemic, that it's both. It's always a balance between individual coping and coping in structure. Yeah. So I think we're on a good path, as I already mentioned.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? That, like you say, the glorification of the sex, drugs, and rock and roll thing is sort of being peeled away of at least artists that are practicing at the moment. But you still sort of hear people talking of, the days when David Bowie existed only on cocaine and red peppers for a long period of time, as if that's kind of something to admire.
Yes, and of course there is still musicians and still people in the business and still people outside the business that love those stories or just take those perspectives on these things. It's still there. It's still there also with people that have actually, been socialized in those generations that, of course, have a different perspective on it still. But me also, of course, working with emerging artists and managements that have not been there for, 50 years, but being in the business right now, I feel like that there is a big shift. Yeah. And this is actually something that is, worth mentioning, I'd say. Providing this help, including like a psychological help or perspective already in the beginning of a career, providing help as labels, providing help as other companies. So there is an effort in doing that. And a lot of young people, I would say, rewrite this narrative on what is interesting. I mean, we also have a lot of artists who talk about their mental health issues and trying to raise awareness. And there's a lot of people that, resonate on this information. Let's look at, for example, Billie Eilish, to name like a huge one. So there's another, let's say, area of field where these things are not glorified, but actually talking very seriously about. And I think that's a good thing. I think that didn't happen like 20 years ago. Correct me if I'm wrong.
You mentioned there that younger artists, younger entrants to the music business who are working with them are more aware of mental health. I see this when I talk to my students, when I teach, and they're 18, 19, they very openly talk about mental health and preventative things and things that when I was that age would either have not known about or would never have talked about. And then you've got the rest of the industry entered it in the 1990s, let's say, and have a different background mindset. They're the ones that are making the decisions, and you've got young entrants who are pushing for a new future. It means the direction of travel is changed, it sounds like, to a better mental health situation. But how do you measure that? How do you measure whether mental health is getting better in the music industry?
I can only say that, there are companies that I work with, there are management agencies and booking agencies I work with, and the artists I work with, and I can say, okay, I get a lot of requests on my work. I also know that from my colleagues, so this is a good sign. So people are, trying to find the help, get the help. I'd say, for example, in music conferences in Germany, on each conference in 2024, you will find at least one panel, workshop, or input on mental health. That's a good sign. We're not the headliner of the program, but I think we're getting better slots. Also, that companies do workshops, and so maybe that's the measurement I can take. If the actual mental health is getting better, you could only tell by talking to people or having the statistics.
You're dealing with individuals, but then those individuals are often part of, let's say, major labels or big management companies, or they're working for big companies promoting events, high-pressure jobs. We've said it in the past that, mental health, the attitude was disastrous in the music industry. So do those big players who make the big money have a significant duty of care for everyone at every layer below them in the music industry to improve the mental health, essentially to help them make more money at the end of the day?
The answer is yes. James Blake just recently said something to that. I'm not quoting him word by word, but he said, well, labels are responsible, and labels should be providing therapeutic help to their artist. And well, he says that's because, you as an artist, you get kind of drawn away from your support system, like family, friends, into like this weird world of, just having relationships that are business related in a way. So this is what he talks about. I would add, yes, I mean, you're making money when we talk about artists. Now you're making money with this person that is creative and identifies with what he or she does, and puts him or herself on stage, and all these different things. And what we know is, well, dealing with a career and dealing with fame, for example, is not something that you can deal with intuitively. So it actually needs help. It needs care. It needs someone who has knowledge on what is helpful for you in order to, go through this career. It's like with athletes, right? It's not intuitive. They don't know how, they need a trainer. They need someone who knows about nutrition. They need someone who knows about, muscle relaxation or whatever, right? So there's specialists there in order to make them run the marathon. And with artists, I think it's the same. So they provide the creativity and the songs and the performance and everything. But in order to deal with, for example, going on tour, in order to deal with fame, like judgment, all the feedback you get, especially now with social media, this is not something someone can just be like, yeah, I'm a natural, I can just deal with it and stay healthy. This is not possible in my opinion. So this is why I think we have to, the companies have to adjust, knowing that these stressors, like the touring or like the judgment, is something that they have to provide help for.
When you speak to artists, what are the sort of common things that they say that they want support for? I mean, in terms of what are they feeling and where their stress is coming in, and also what support would they like to have built in around them to take care of that, aside from coming to see you? I mean, what could the changes be in the industry in general that would support them through those things?
Well, it goes from performance anxiety to creative blocks to relationships. Let's pick out the relationship one. So when you're an artist and you're an emerging artist or you're getting popular, you, as I already said or quoted James Blake, you have a different support system because usually your family and friends live in, let's say, the normal world and cannot have much empathy on what is happening in your life. So you feel very lonely. You also feel very lonely because all the new relationships you have are always friendly, but also economically driven, right? Even though you're best friend with your management, this person is dependent on your success. So it gets difficult when you feel like, I want to drop out, or I want to do a break, or I don't want to do this performance, or I don't feel well. So how do you communicate that to someone who is like the go-to person, but at the same time earns his or her money with what you do, right? This is difficult. So how do you, like building relationships, who do you trust? What is your support system? How do you communicate? I think communicate is a big issue. And referring to your question on what they ask for, what they wish, is I think a lot of transparency on what is like planned or happening with them as an artist, as, let's say, the product that the people deal with. guidelines, clear roles on who is responsible for what, being aware of the stressors that might come. For example, uncertainty. The artists deal with a lot of uncertainty. No one knows if their next, even like popular artists never know if their next album is going to succeed, right? You never know if, I don't know, someone takes a weird photo of you, there's a meme, so the whole world makes fun of you. Yeah, so financial insecurities, let's look at the pandemic, do you sell out a tour and all these things. So there's a need for being prepared to be like, okay, this is what you're probably going through, and this is how we will deal with it. And this is something we can, change in our communication or the support system. And there are other things that we cannot change, but we can, find coping strategies when things appear. So, this is what I prepare the artist for, or what I work with. But usually I'm also working close with management or booking agencies.
This is maybe a slightly cynical question. A lot of big companies in the music industry are saying, well, mental health is really important to us, right? It is an industry where there are times where, you have to go the extra mile, the extra pressures come on, you have to go on tour and carry on going when you're tired. You've got to hit the deadline, get the album out, and the mix is done on this time. That is high pressure. In those moments, it feels like hitting those targets and making the money happen is taking priority. And I understand that to an extent. Is that the point where the emphasis on mental health sort of steps out of the room and the pressure comes back in again? And how do those people who are suddenly thrust into an unavoidable pressure situation deal with it?
I'm really glad that you're mentioning that, because this is usually like an argument on not caring much on mental health. Well, we can't change how the industry works. But as I said, maybe it's more important or more necessary to talk about adaptation rather than change, because change to some people means like, okay, everything that I did until now is going to not be there anymore, or but let's talk about how to adapt to circumstances. So yes, there are deadlines. Yes, there is peak stress. Humans are made to have like stress from time to time. That's okay. But it's more on, okay, so what are the coping strategies that we can change in order to face those, let's say, crises or stress moments, right? And there is a lot that you can do, actually. If it's preparing, if you like smoothen your communication, if you set new boundaries, if you get help from somewhere, or if okay, this week is going to be horrible, but next week I will do a lot to, recharge my batteries. That is fine. Yeah. Again, comparing to athletes, they do that too. I mean, in order to run a marathon, you have to run a marathon. You cannot do it differently, right? But what you can do is train, you can prepare and all these things. And I think for the music industry, that counts as well. So what can you do in order to, for example, charge your batteries to go into a stressful phase? Yeah. What can you do when it's actually happening? It doesn't mean we have to stop being in those stressful moments, because that's not going to work. That's not realistic, I would say. But there's still a lot you can do in order to cope differently.
I can imagine people might be listening to that and saying, "Yeah, that's my life. I work in music marketing, and I'm constantly just moving on to the next pressure deadline." And so you work up to a deadline, and then it tails off, and then it quickly works up to another one. That's a difficult environment to be in. And what you've just suggested about, okay, you've had a pressure week, and then next week, let's have a non-pressure week. That is kind of reliant on a boss above you believing that and buying into it, and also leading by example there. So is that happening?
If you have a job that you feel like you go into like a chronic stress loop, still you would have to focus on what are my routines in order to recharge. From my experience with music industry professionals and teams, there is always time that, breaks are not taken properly, let's say. That you, by, for example, overworking, the quality of your work gets less. So you might feel the pressure to work even more because you feel like you're not getting done as much as you should in an hour or so. So here we look at, okay, how often do I do a break? How is the quality of a break, right? Do we actually know who's responsible for doing what? I also find teams that are not so clear about this. So some people do extra work or get lost in communication. That takes a lot of time. Or certain kind of pressure is communicated badly, and then these worst case scenarios go up, or you feel a lot more pressure than there actually is. So there's a lot of small things you can still do and adjust, I would say, that make these deadline after deadline more livable. And of course, I must say, so if the workplace you're in, even though if the workplace I'm working in has work for me to do that would take 48 hours in one day, I can do the best time management. I could be the best, break taker in the world. Still, it would not be enough in order to stay healthy. So this is where I'm pointing out that structures have to be changed. But I'm not saying that you have to create a workplace where everyone's laying in the bubble bath all the time. But to look at, okay, how can we, from above, change the structures to provide good communication, to look at the workload of the people we work with, to maybe have more people working on how to delegate and all these things. So there's always something to do, I would say.
I feel like a lot of people listening to what you've just described will be nodding along in recognition to some of those things.
Okay, so talking to the individuals now. What I recommend is to go for the small changes, right? To check your day, to be aware of how does it actually feel? What do I feel? What do I think? And how do I behave when I feel well? How do I feel? How do I think? How do I behave when I'm not doing well? To just notice the difference, right? This is the first step in order to do something. Then noticing change, right? I'm not feeling well, and it's been like that for weeks, for example. And then rather than, 1st of January, you are like, oh yeah, I've got to stop smoking and do a lot of sports and stuff like that. Rather than doing that, be like, okay, I'm going to scan the day. And from now on, I'm going to establish just 10 minutes of doing something different. What could be a good routine? Okay, it could be the walk around the block. Or it could be having a cigarette on the balcony. Whatever it is, okay? So try to do small changes towards your well-being and experiment with that. And then if it works well, increase that. I also recommend to form communities, because talking about what's actually stressing you out is comforting. You also get support, and you also might get ideas of other people, how they dealt with the same problem, right? And sometimes if you find a few people in your company, be like, okay, let's, focus on well-being. Let's focus on every day everyone's doing something for their well-being, and these chat groups, and I already did this and that, and then someone else feels more pushed or empowered to do the same thing. So use these little things. It's very much about the first step, and then establishing routines and doing the next step. So this should be something that I think everyone could try. And best case scenario in companies, of course, is when you have like supervision or intervision. So even someone like an expert there that moderates, these things.
And it is still appealing in a sense that being, people see pop stars and they're marketed as being sort of on the edge. People can vicariously live some sort of life through them. They would never go and do that, but they can see it and look at the rock star on the stage, look at the pop star performing. Well, I'd never do that, but they're doing it and I can live that excitement. So there is a difficult tension there, right? So there will always be this element of glamorization of the other, and yet there needs to be a balance of mental health. So as you look forward, what do you see?
The glamorous of the other can be so many things. It doesn't necessarily have to be I'm super drunk on stage and people can actually see that I'm starving or whatever, right? It's okay to do some excess, to be, in crazy colors, strange behavior, whatever, be crazy. I think the artist identity, this is something really nice. I mean, artists, if they want to, have the possibility to create this other person and explore things that might not in society not be, perceived as normal. So I think this has to stay, but it's not necessarily connected to your mental health, right? Because if you're depressed for a long time, you probably won't be able to, fully live this artist life or like do express everything that one express. So I think we have to disconnect that more. What I think is necessary when we look at artists, as I already said, there are some stressors that we can change, like communication with the team, getting mental health service provided, being psychoeducated on the stressors and everything that's going to happen in your career. So in the future, I see that there is like psychologists or trained specialists are part of the team from day one. Doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be there every week, but they get to know the people, and then when needed, they kind of step in. And to find better ways of coping with stuff, as I already said, that you can't change. For music industry professionals, I hope that the culture of work environment and the combination of being super passionate about what we do and the necessities of like deadlines and stuff like that get more into balance. And I actually think this is possible. But cultural change needs some time. Also mentioning, like, I think the music business is a very diverse place in a way. Looking at age, for example, okay? So usually people in the leading positions might be a little older and experienced, and there's a lot of new people or young people coming in. So it doesn't have to be the way that the younger people want it. It doesn't have to be the way that the old people have always been doing it, but it's about looking at the diversity you have in the teams and taking all the good and the experience and the impulses and the needs and the wishes and, creating the best out of it. So it's not like it's either that way or I'm wrong, I'm right and you're wrong, but it's like, okay, the music business is changing, that's a fact. So in order to adapt to the changes, we need the experience and the impulses and the brains of everyone. And this is how it should work. And I think this is like opportunities that not everyone is seizing right now, but should.
Wise words. And of course, the music industry at the moment, or at least some significant parts of it, and the major players are making tons of money. And it sort of makes sense to say, well, if you've invested some of that money into mental health, you would make even more money. So from a business perspective, it sort of makes sense. Let's see what happens. But what I will do is I will put some links to your practice beneath the podcast and as well to MITC, and people can get in touch and get involved and hopefully speed along that process. Now, Anna, one final thing, which we have spoken about the music business in a sense for the last 40 minutes. But my final question, as ever, is about music. And what if you could only listen? This is maybe this isn't a great. Having spoken about stress and talking about false pressure in the music industry, I'm gonna now place you under that. So, if you could only listen to one piece of music for the rest of your life, what would it be? Anna has her face in her hands, which I don't think that's ideal behavior in a therapist's office. But
I must admit, I listen to a lot of music that I have been listening to for a long time. But it's not the one song, but it's more like different playlist. So I would put Björk on the playlist. I would put Fiona Apple on the playlist. Well, I was born in 83, and so I was musically socialized in the 90s and early 2000s. So this is the women that actually, I listened a lot to. What else would it be? Maybe Radiohead.
And why?
Oh, why? Okay. Well, I listen to music because I want to regulate feelings or dive deep into feelings and also memories, I think, or memories of feelings of a certain time. So the music I listened to when I was a teenager, of course, holds a lot of memories and feelings, ups and downs and stuff like that. So in that way, it makes me feel comfortable in a way. It's like old friends that you listen to and then, approach these friends in order to, there's the funny one and there's the melancholic one. And so that would be my playlist, actually.
A highly appropriate answer, considering your profession. I will put some links to them beneath the podcast. Actually, there's another conversation to be had there about the therapeutic benefits of music, isn't there? But that, for another time, perhaps. Anne Löhr, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, too.
There we are. Big thank you again to Anna for allowing me to sit on her therapist's couch. And if you found that interview useful, please do share the podcast on with someone else who you think will get something out of it. There are links to Anna and the MITC below the podcast. And as well, if you'd like to get in touch with me, of course, I would love to hear from you. You can email me. That's Joe, Joe, @musically.com. And you can stay in touch a different way. You can sign up for our weekly free email called The Knowledge, which rounds up bits and pieces of the best analysis, news, marketing insight, and skills from across Musically's wide range of services. Link to that is also beneath the podcast. Sign up and impress your friends. That's it. Thank you for listening in this particularly therapeutic session. I've been Joe Sparrow. You have been you. And until next time, farewell.